She wore the dress. She walked the aisle. She did everything right. And he still chose someone else, in front of 500 witnesses, 24 cameras, and every powerful person in Manhattan. Kang Tae-jun didn't just break Amara Coleman's heart at the altar. He broke it publicly, deliberately, and without a single word of warning. But here is what he never understood about the woman he threw away. Amara Coleman did not collapse. She did not beg. She did not disappear. She built an empire. And 5 years later, she made sure the entire world knew her name. If you want to watch what happens when a man destroys the wrong woman, stay until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the wedding, Manhattan smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The sky above Midtown hung low and colorless, pressing down on the glass towers like a held breath. And inside the Grand Windsor Hotel, the air was different. Warm, thick with gardenias and expensive perfume, humming with the kind of anticipatory energy that only gathers when serious money and serious power occupy the same room. The chandeliers in the grand ballroom had been lit since 6 in the morning. The florists had finished by 7. By 8 o'clock, the first black SUVs were already pulling up to the valet line on 54th Street, and the men climbing out of them were not men you looked at twice unless you wanted to be noticed looking. Amara Coleman stood at the window of the bridal suite on the 14th floor and watched the cars arrive. She was already dressed, had been dressed for 40 minutes. Her gown was ivory silk crepe with a structured bodice and a train that moved behind her like a slow tide, and her hair was pulled back from her face in a way that made her cheekbones look like architecture. Deliberate, load-bearing, precise. She had designed the silhouette herself. Of course she had. Amara designed everything she touched. She pressed 2 fingers to the cold glass and watched a man in a charcoal suit step out of a black car below. She didn't know who he was. A senator, maybe. A foreign finance minister. At Tae-jun's wedding, you couldn't always tell the difference. Her maid of honor, Priya Kapoor, was talking behind her. Had been talking for several minutes. Amara heard the cadence of it without hearing the words. Something about the timeline, about the officiant, about whether the cocktail hour would run long if the ceremony started late. Amara, I'm listening. You're staring out the window. I can do both. Priya stopped moving. She was a small woman with an enormous presence, a corporate attorney who had been Amara's closest friend since graduate school, and she had a particular silence she deployed when she thought Amara was lying to herself. She deployed it now. Amara turned from the window. I'm fine, Amara said. I didn't ask. You were about to. Priya studied her for a moment, the stillness of her, the particular quality of composure that Amara wore the way other women wore jewelry, as something chosen, as something that required maintenance. Then Priya picked up the small bouquet from the table and crossed the room and put it in Amara's hands. You look extraordinary, Priya said quietly. I know. Amara looked down at the flowers, white ranunculus and pale eucalyptus, simple, almost severe. She had chosen those too. That's not what I'm thinking about. What are you thinking about? Amara was quiet for a moment. Outside, another car arrived. The sound of the city came through the glass in muffled fragments. Horns, wind, the low diesel groan of a delivery truck navigating the blocked-off side street. I keep thinking about his face, she said finally. When he first told me he wanted to marry me. We were standing on the roof of his building in Seoul, 2 in the morning. He had this look. She stopped, started again. He didn't ask. He doesn't ask things. You know that. He just said, I want you to be my wife. And I looked at him and I thought, this man has spent his entire life being afraid of losing things. And he's choosing to stop being afraid. With me. Priya said nothing. I believe that, Amara said. I still believe it. I think it was true when he said it. But? Amara set the bouquet down on the window ledge. But people are also true in the moment, and then the moment passes. It was not a question. It was not quite a fear. It sat somewhere in the territory between the two, and Amara had been carrying it for 3 weeks without naming it, and naming it now did not make it smaller. It made it exact. Priya opened her mouth. Before she could speak, there was a knock at the suite door. 2 sharp raps, brisk and businesslike. It was Marcus Webb, Tae-jun's head of security. A broad-shouldered American man with a military bearing and eyes that never settled, he had worked for Tae-jun for 11 years and communicated almost exclusively in information stripped of all tone. He stood in the doorway in his dark suit and looked at Amara the way a person looks at something they have been instructed to handle carefully. Ms. Coleman, the ceremony is scheduled to begin in 32 minutes. Mr. Kang asked me to confirm you're ready. Tell him I'm ready. Marcus nodded. He did not move. Amara looked at him directly. Is there something else? A pause. Brief. The kind of pause that contains a decision. No, ma'am, Marcus said. 32 minutes. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Priya was looking at Amara. He was going to say something, Amara said. Maybe. He decided not to. Amara, hand me the bouquet. 3 floors below, in a service corridor that connected the hotel's executive wing to the secondary event spaces, Kang Tae-jun stood with his back against a gray wall and looked at the woman in front of him and felt the specific physical sensation of something collapsing inside his chest. Not violently, not dramatically, but the way a structure fails when a single weight-bearing element gives way, slowly and then completely. Serena Whitlock had not aged. That was the first thing he thought, and he hated himself for thinking it. But it was true in the way uncomfortable things are true, plainly, without decoration. She was tall, pale, with dark hair she wore loose over one shoulder, and she had the kind of beauty that operated like a weapon. You didn't feel it hit you, only the damage it left. She had found him. He did not know how. He did not know which member of his staff she had contacted or what she had told them, but she had appeared in this corridor 12 minutes ago while he was walking from his dressing suite to meet with his wedding coordinator, and the sight of her had stopped him the way almost nothing stopped him anymore. You shouldn't be here, he said. His English was precise and nearly accent-free. He'd worked on it for years, another thing he had disciplined into himself like everything else. I know, Serena said. How did you get into this building? Does it matter? Yes. She looked at him steadily. She had always been able to do that, hold his gaze without flinching, without performance. It was one of the things that had made him trust her once. I told them I was a guest, a late RSVP. Your coordinator is very accommodating. He would deal with that later. He filed it away the way he filed everything operational, quickly, without emotion, for retrieval at the appropriate time. What do you want, Serena? It was not a question. Questions implied he didn't already know. She took one step toward him. I want you to hear me. 3 minutes, that's all. I'm getting married and... I know when you're getting married. That's why I'm here now and not 6 months ago. The corridor was empty. He had sent Marcus upstairs to check on Amara, which meant there was no one in this particular hallway except the two of them. The hotel's ambient noise came through the walls in a muffled, underwater way. The murmur of 500 guests, the string quartet warming up in the ballroom, the low hydraulic hiss of a service elevator somewhere nearby. Tae-jun did not move. He was aware of the time in a physical way, like pressure behind his eyes. 29 minutes now. He should walk away. He knew he should walk away. He had spent 15 years building a life that required him to make clean decisions and walk away from everything that threatened the structure of what he'd built. 3 minutes, he said. Serena exhaled, just slightly, just enough to tell him she had been holding her breath. Seoul, she said, when everything fell apart, when Baek Chul-soo's people were coming for you and you had nothing left? No allies, no money, no way out? Do you remember what I said? I remember everything. I said I would stay. And then you left. I left because they threatened me. Her voice was level, but something in it had gone tight. You know that. You found out eventually. You knew by the time you rebuilt. You knew they told me if I didn't disappear, they would... I know what they told you. Then you know I didn't choose to go. You could have come back. To what? She spread her hand slightly, a small, contained gesture. You were already rebuilding, already closing yourself off. You had walls I couldn't find a door in. He looked at her. The corridor hummed around them. Why are you saying this now? He said. Because I watched you build everything, from a distance. I watched you become exactly what you always said you would be. And I watched you meet her, and I thought... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I thought I'd missed my moment, that I'd forfeited it, and I was going to let you go. I was. And then this morning I woke up and I realized that if I didn't say this today, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. Serena, I never stopped, she said. That's what I need you to hear. I never stopped loving you. What we had wasn't just history, it was the last time either of us was fully honest with another person. You know that's true. He did know it. That was the problem. He knew it the way you know a thing that has been buried carefully and stays buried until someone lifts a single handful of dirt and the whole excavation collapses inward. He said nothing. Serena moved closer. Close enough that he could smell her perfume. The same one, unchanged, which was either coincidence or calculation, and with Serena he had never been certain which was which. She put one hand against his chest, light, barely touching, and looked up at him. Tell me you don't feel it, she said. Tell me honestly, and I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. Taejun's jaw tightened. His breathing had changed, and he hated that it had changed, hated that his body had this particular memory that his mind could not fully override. He thought of Amara upstairs. He thought of her steadiness, her architecture, the way she moved through spaces as if she had already calculated every load and stress point before she entered them. He thought of Serena in Seoul, 17 years ago. The specific feeling of being 26 years old and having nothing and having her, which had felt like enough. Taejun, Serena said softly, and she kissed him. He didn't stop her. That was the truth of it, the part he would spend years afterward trying to explain to himself and failing. He didn't stop her. For 4 seconds, he counted them later, obsessively, uselessly. He stood in a service corridor on the morning of his wedding and let 17 years of buried feelings surface, and he did not stop it. Then he stepped back. He put 18 inches of deliberate space between them and pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and looked at her. Serena's expression was unreadable. 26 minutes, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. Taejun, you need to leave this corridor. You felt it. What I feel is not the point. It's the only point. He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were still. His face had reset to the particular blankness he'd trained himself to wear in rooms where everything depended on concealment. But something behind it was moving in a direction he couldn't control, and he knew it, and the knowing of it frightened him in a way that almost nothing frightened him anymore. He walked away from her. The Grand Ballroom of the Grand Windsor was a room designed to make people feel appropriately small. Its ceiling rose 40 feet above the polished marble floor, hung with 3 chandeliers that together contained more than 20,000 individual crystals. And on a morning like this, with 500 guests arranged in gilded chairs, and the late spring light coming through the tall windows on the east wall, it had the quality of something not quite real, a stage set constructed at enormous expense to approximate grandeur. The guests were the kind of people whose presence in a single room constituted a geopolitical event. 2 members of the United States Senate, the finance minister of South Korea, a European Union trade commissioner, 3 Fortune 100 CEOs, a pair of international film actors whose combined Instagram following exceeded 90 million people. Scattered among them, invisible to the uninitiated, were men and women who served other functions. Men who moved money in quantities that never appeared in public records. Women who brokered relationships between institutions that officially had no relationship with each other. The Baeko Syndicate was not a thing you named aloud at a wedding, but its presence was felt in the room the way the presence of weight is felt in a structure, everywhere, in everything, holding it all together. Priya walked Amara to the entrance of the ballroom at exactly 11:53. They stood in the corridor outside the double doors, and Amara could hear the string quartet shift into the processional, and she could feel through the soles of her shoes the minute vibration of 500 people rising to their feet, and she held her bouquet in both hands and breathed. Ready? Priya said. Yes. You're going to cut. Don't. Priya closed her mouth. The doors opened. The ballroom was extraordinary. Amara saw it in a single comprehensive sweep the way she always saw spaces. Structurally, immediately, all at once. And then the crowd blurred into a peripheral impression of color and upturned faces, and she began to walk. She was 31 steps from the altar when she noticed the empty space. Taejun's position was marked by the officiant, an older man in a dark suit who stood at the center of the elevated platform with his hands clasped and his expression professionally serene. To his left stood Taejun's best man, Min Jae-won, a Korean man of 40 with a lean, watchful face who was looking somewhere to Amara's right with an expression she couldn't read. The position to the officiant's right, Taejun's position, was empty. Amara kept walking. Her training, her discipline, the particular architecture of her composure, it kept her moving for 12 more steps before the absence became undeniable. She stopped. The music continued for 3 more measures before the quartet realized what was happening. Then, one by one, the instruments fell silent. 500 people. Silence. Amara stood in the center aisle of the grand ballroom in her ivory silk gown and her precisely chosen flowers, and looked at the empty space where her future husband was supposed to be standing. Chaewon's eyes met hers. He looked away immediately. The ballroom doors opened behind her. She did not turn around right away. She heard the doors, heard the shift in the room's atmosphere, heard the beginning of murmurs that moved through the crowd like a current. Not words yet, just sound, the collective intake of breath that 500 people make when something has gone deeply, publicly wrong. Then she turned. Kang Tae-jun stood at the back of the ballroom. He was dressed for the wedding, dark suit, white shirt, no tie. He had never worn ties, one of his small, deliberate refusals of convention. His hair was pushed back from his face, and his posture was the posture it always was, straight, controlled, giving nothing away except power. Serena Whitlock stood beside him, her hand inside the crook of his elbow. Amara looked at her. Dark hair loose over one shoulder, a red dress, long and fitted, the particular expression of a woman who has calculated her moment and executed it. Taejun's eyes found Amara's across the length of the ballroom. He didn't look away. That was the thing she would remember later, in the weeks and months of reconstruction that followed. He didn't look away. He held her gaze with the same directness he'd used when he said, "I want you to be my wife," on a rooftop in Seoul. And she understood then that whatever had broken inside him in the hours before the ceremony had not broken his ability to stand in what he was doing. He was not embarrassed. He was not frantic. He was, in the way she had always both admired and feared in him, entirely present in the worst thing he was choosing. He spoke. Not loudly. He had never needed volume. His voice carried in the way that voices carry when rooms have learned to go silent for them. "I owe everyone here an apology," he said, especially Amara. The room was so quiet that Amara could hear the traffic outside, 6 stories below and half a city block away. "I can't marry her," he said. "Not today. Not—" A pause. The first crack in the architecture of his composure. "I'm sorry." He looked at Amara, just at her. "I'm sorry," he said again. Quieter this time. As if the second one was not for the room. Amara looked at him for 3 seconds. She counted them the way she had learned to count difficult things. As a structural exercise, as a way of measuring load. Then she looked down at the bouquet in her hands. White ranunculus. Pale eucalyptus. Simple, almost severe. She had chosen them herself 3 weeks ago, in a flower market in the West Village on a Tuesday morning while Taejun was in a board meeting, and she had chosen them because they didn't perform anything, because they were what they were. She set the bouquet down on the nearest empty chair. She did not cry. Her hands were steady. Her face was not. She turned and walked, not quickly, not as if fleeing, but with the measured deliberateness of a woman who has decided exactly where she is going, even if she doesn't yet know where that is. And the crowd parted for her, and the double doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and she walked through them, into the corridor, and then through the corridor, and then into the lobby, and then through the lobby, and out through the hotel's service entrance onto 54th Street, where the morning air hit her like cold water, and the city continued making all of its ordinary sounds. A black town car was idling at the curb. Not hers. Someone had called it. Later, she would find out it was Marcus Webb, who had pressed $500 in cash into the driver's hand 20 minutes earlier and told him to wait for a woman in an ivory dress and take her wherever she asked. The driver got out. He looked at her with the careful neutrality of a man who has seen things and knows better than to speak about them. Amara got into the car. "Where to, ma'am?" She pressed her back against the seat. She was breathing. She was aware of being breathing in the specific way you become aware of it when everything else has stopped working, as a fact, as evidence, as the one system still running. "Drive," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Any direction?" She looked out the window. The hotel receded behind them. The city moved around the car in its relentless, indifferent way. Yellow cabs and food trucks, and pedestrians with headphones, and a woman walking a dog, and a man selling newspapers, and a construction crew tearing up a section of pavement on the corner, all of it continuing with the complete absence of ceremony that the world grants to private catastrophes. "North," she said. "Just go north." The driver went north. Amara watched Manhattan slide past the window, block by block, and her hands were in her lap and her face was toward the glass, and in the reflection she could see herself, the dress, the hair, the deliberate architecture of a woman who had prepared for everything except the specific thing that had happened. She was not thinking about Taejun. She was not yet thinking about Serena. She was thinking about what she had said to Priya that morning, in the bridal suite, with the city spread out below them. People are also true in the moment, and then the moment passes. She had known. Not specifically. Not the name or the face or the red dress. But she had known in the way you know a load-bearing wall is compromised before you can see the crack, by the way the building settles, by the sound it makes in the night, by the particular quality of silence in a structure that is beginning to fail. She had walked toward it anyway. That was the part she needed to understand. Not what he had done. Not why. The part she needed to understand was why she had set down her professional judgment at the entrance to this relationship and picked up hope instead, as if hope were a building material, as if you could construct something permanent out of wanting. The car crossed into the upper 90s. The park was on her left, green and enormous, and the buildings thinned on either side as they moved north. And the sky was still the same colorless gray it had been all morning, still pressing down, still holding the rain it had not yet decided to release. Amara reached into the small clutch she was still somehow holding, the ivory clutch with the seed pearl clasp that she had also chosen herself, and she took out her phone. 12 missed calls. Priya. Her mother. Priya again. A number she didn't recognize. Priya. She put the phone back without answering any of them. She looked at her reflection in the window. "You're going to be fine," she said to it quietly, as a statement of engineering rather than comfort. The woman in the glass looked back at her. The dress. The hair. The precise load-bearing cheekbones. Fine was not the word for what Amara Coleman was going to be. But she didn't know that yet. What she knew in the car going north through Manhattan on the morning her wedding had been publicly dismantled in front of 500 witnesses. Was this? She was still breathing. She had set the flowers down rather than throwing them. She had walked through the door herself rather than being carried. These were small facts. She held them the way you hold small facts when large structures have failed, as evidence that something is still standing. The rain finally came as the car crossed into Harlem. It hit the windshield in a sudden heavy sheet, and the driver turned on the wipers, and the city outside blurred and darkened and kept moving, as cities do, as cities always do, with the perfect and terrible indifference of things that were built to last. Amara pressed her fingertips to the cold glass. Behind her, somewhere in the Grand Windsor Hotel, 500 people were beginning to talk. Every phone in the room was already working. Every camera had captured what it needed. By nightfall, Kang Tae-jun's name and Amara Coleman's face would be on every entertainment news platform, every financial gossip site, every social media feed that tracked the movements of power and money. And somewhere in that hotel, in some corridor or suite or private room, Serena Whitlock was standing very close to Kang Tae-jun with her hand still inside the crook of his elbow. And Tae-jun, for the first time in 15 years, had no idea what he had just done. He thought he had made a choice. He thought he had followed something honest back to its source. He did not yet understand that Serena Whitlock had been inside his life for 2 years before she appeared in that corridor. Did not yet understand the particular patience of a woman who studies a structure for a long time before she begins to take it apart. He did not yet understand what he had thrown away. But Amara Coleman, sitting in the back of a town car in the rain, with no flowers and no plan, and $500 worth of someone else's mercy between her and the street, Amara was already beginning to understand something different, not what she had lost, what she had left. The car moved north through the rain. The city held its shape around them. Amara Coleman breathed in, breathed out, and looked at the road ahead with the precise, undecorated attention of a woman who has just been handed the worst possible material and is already, without knowing it, beginning to build. The grandmother's house sat at the end of a gravel road on the Connecticut shoreline, 11 miles from the nearest town with a traffic light, and it smelled like cedar and salt and the specific absence of other people. Amara had not been inside it in 4 years. The key was where it had always been, under the third porch step, wrapped in a square of oilcloth that her grandmother had replaced every spring without fail until the spring she couldn't anymore. Amara had driven herself from New York. She'd changed out of the wedding dress in a gas station bathroom outside Stamford, folding the ivory silk into the trunk of the rental car with the precise, emotionless efficiency of a woman packing away evidence. She wore jeans now, and a gray sweater that belonged to no particular occasion, and her hair was down, and she looked, she thought, like someone who had survived something without yet knowing the full extent of the damage. She spent the first 3 days not answering her phone. Priya came on the 4th day. She didn't call ahead. She simply appeared at the screen door at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and the expression of a woman who has rehearsed several versions of a conversation and discarded all of them. Amara let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. The window above the sink looked out over the water, gray and flat and restless, the surface broken by wind in small, irregular patterns. Amara wrapped both hands around her coffee and looked at it. "Tell me," she said. Priya set her cup down. "It's everywhere." "I know it's everywhere." "Your phone." "I know." "Amara, the photographs are—" Priya stopped. Tried again. "Someone got a shot of him walking in with her. It's been picked up by 40 international outlets. The financial press is running it alongside pieces about the Baeko Syndicate's restructuring. They're connecting things." Amara looked up. "What things?" "The timing of the wedding, the guest list. There are people speculating that the whole event was—" Priya chose her words with the precision of an attorney who understands that precision is a form of care. "That it was theater, that you were positioned." The kitchen was quiet except for the water outside and the refrigerator's low mechanical hum. "They think I knew," Amara said. "Some of them." "And the ones who don't?" Priya was quiet for a moment. "The ones who don't are calling it the most public humiliation of the decade." Amara turned back to the window. A gull crossed the frame of it, low and fast, angling into the wind. "That's generous," she said. "It's not a competition." "No." Amara set her cup down. "What about him?" "He's made no public statement. His communications team released 2 lines about a mutual decision made in good faith. Serena Whitlock gave an exclusive to a lifestyle magazine. It runs next week." The muscle in Amara's jaw moved. Just once. Of course she did. "His investors are nervous. 2 of the European partnerships have gone quiet. There's a meeting scheduled in Seoul next month that 3 of the syndicate's senior partners have already declined to attend." "Good." "Amara," I said good, Priya. "I don't have sympathy for his calendar." Priya looked at her steadily. Outside the wind picked up and the water changed texture, going from flat gray to something more agitated, and the house creaked once in the way old houses creak. Not from weakness, but from memory. "What do you need?" Priya said. Amara was quiet for a long time. Long enough that a lesser friendship would have filled the silence. Priya didn't fill it. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult depositions, attentively, without agenda. "I need to find the letter," Amara said finally. Priya frowned. "What letter?" "My grandmother left me a letter. When she died, I couldn't—" She stopped. "I put it somewhere in this house, and I couldn't bring myself to open it. That was 3 years ago." She pushed back from the table. She found it in the second drawer of the writing desk in the back bedroom, beneath a folded road map of coastal Connecticut and a small bundle of seed packets that had never been planted. The envelope was cream-colored and had been addressed in her grandmother's handwriting. Small, slanted, the letters pressed hard into the paper the way people write when they have something to say and want the saying of it to last. Amara sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. She read it twice, the second time more slowly. Her grandmother had been a woman who built things with her hands. Furniture, gardens, relationships, arguments. She had grown up with nothing and had accumulated enough through sheer refusal to be diminished, and she had never in her life confused the accumulation with the point. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It didn't mention Taijun, who her grandmother had met once and assessed in the wordless, comprehensive way she assessed everything. It said, "You were always building towards something larger than what anyone put in front of you. Stop letting their ceilings become your floors." That was the second paragraph. The third one was shorter. It said, "The work is the thing. The work was always the thing. You know what yours is?" Amara folded the letter along its original creases and put it in the pocket of her jeans. She sat for a while on the edge of the bed in the back bedroom of her grandmother's house, while the wind came off the water outside and moved through the gaps in the old window frames, and she thought about architecture, not as a career, as a fact, the way a beam distributes load, the way a foundation is designed not to resist force, but to receive it and transmit it downward into something that can hold. The way the most durable structures are never the ones built to look permanent. They're the ones built to flex. She had stopped flexing. Somewhere in the years with Taijun, amid the dinners and the summits and the carefully curated public appearances and the private life that was always adjacent to power and never quite her own, she had stopped building toward anything that was hers. She pulled out her phone. She had 47 unread messages. She scrolled past all of them until she found the one from 6 months ago. An email from a London-based development group forwarded by her former professor at Columbia, asking if she would be interested in presenting her urban sustainability concepts at a private conference in April. She had declined. She'd been busy with the wedding. She stared at the email for a moment. Then she opened a new message and began to type. In Manhattan, in the 42nd floor office of the Kang Global Investment Group's Midtown headquarters, Kang Taijun stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city below with the expression of a man who has recently made an irreversible structural error and is in the process of calculating its full cost. It was 11 days after the wedding, or what would have been the wedding. He had stopped calling it that in his internal accounting. He called it the 14th, as in the event of the 14th, the way you refer to a disaster by its date rather than its name, when the name is still too loaded to carry without flinching. Chaewon was behind him, sitting in one of the leather chairs across from the desk. Not sitting in the relaxed way, but in the forward way, elbows on knees, which meant he was about to say something Taijun wasn't going to want to hear. "The Mercer Group called again," Chaewon said. "I know. They want a response by Friday." "I know that too. Taejun." A pause. Chaewon had known him for 22 years, long enough to use his name as punctuation. The Mercer Group is not the problem. The Mercer Group is a symptom. The problem is that 3 of our institutional partners have heard the Whitlock name in connection with the Baco accounts, and they don't like what they're hearing. Taejun turned from the window. What are they hearing? That she has relationships with people in the Cheon network. The room went a different kind of quiet. The Cheon network was not a name that circulated in public. It was not a name that circulated even in most private conversations within the syndicate. It was the name of a financial infrastructure that had been built in opposition to the Baeko syndicate over 14 years by a man named Cheon Sang-ho, who was patient in the way that only men with long memories and longer grievances can be patient. Taejun had known Cheon Sang-ho since they were both young men in Seoul, making decisions that would take years to fully mature. He had not underestimated him in a decade. "Who told you this?" Taejun said. His voice had gone flat. "Han, from the Seoul office. He reached out yesterday. He said he's been watching some of the financial movements in the Whitlock account and something isn't mapping correctly against her stated income streams." "What do you mean, isn't mapping?" "He means there's money going in that doesn't have a clean explanation." Chaewon leaned back slightly. His eyes were steady and careful in the way they got when he was navigating something he knew was mind. "He's been watching it for 4 months." 4 months? Taejun said it without inflection. "He didn't want to bring it to you before the—" Chaewon stopped. "He didn't want to bring it to you before." The silence between them had weight. Taejun turned back to the window. Below him the city continued its indifferent motion. Cabs and pedestrians and the slow crawl of a delivery truck on 6th Avenue, all of it operating according to its own logic, entirely unconcerned with the particular calculations happening 42 floors above it. "Where is she now?" he said. "Upstairs. She had a lunch scheduled with the Hartwell group." A pause. "She moved into the residential suite." Another silence. Longer this time. "She moved in," Taejun said. 3 days after the 14th. He hadn't asked her to do that. He hadn't not asked her. In the days immediately following what had happened at the Grand Windsor, he had been moving through his own life with the particular numbness of a man who has made a large and public decision and is waiting for the internal weather to catch up with the external consequences. Serena had been there, present, familiar in the way that old habits are familiar. Not comforting, exactly, but known. He had not examined it closely. He was beginning to understand that had been a mistake. "Get Han on the phone," he said. "Tonight." Jaewon stood. "There's something else." Tae-jun looked at him. "Amara," Jaewon said. "She's been invited to London. The Ashcroft Development Group. Vivian Ashcroft personally called her. They want to discuss a partnership." "How do you know this?" "Because Marcus told me. And Marcus told me because he still has 2 people on a protective detail she doesn't know about." He held up one hand at Tae-jun's expression. "Don't. He put them on before the 14th. He hasn't pulled them." Tae-jun looked at him for a long moment. "Pull them." "Tae-jun, she doesn't need my protection anymore." "Pull them." Jaewon nodded once. He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back. His expression was not quite judgment. It was the thing adjacent to judgment that long friendship produces. A kind of grieved clarity. "For what it's worth," Jaewon said quietly, "Han told me she looked good. In the photos from Connecticut. She looked—" He searched for the word. "He said she looked like herself again." Tae-jun said nothing. Jaewon left. The office was very quiet. Tae-jun stood at the window and looked at the city and breathed in through his nose and out and tried to locate the specific feeling that had been living in his chest since the morning of the 14th. He had categorized it initially as guilt, then as residual doubt, then as the natural aftermath of a significant decision. He was beginning to suspect it was none of those things. He was beginning to suspect it was the specific feeling of a man who has broken something he had no right to break and only understands the full value of what it was after it is no longer in his hands. Serena Whitlock stood in the center of the residential suite on the 44th floor and looked at the view the way people look at things they have not yet finished calculating. The suite was extraordinary, one of 4 in the building, reserved for visiting partners and select members of the Kang Group's senior leadership. She had moved her things in on a Tuesday without asking. She had done it the way she did most things, by establishing presence before permission was requested, which is to say, by making the permission retroactive. Her phone was on the console table behind her. It had buzzed 4 times in the last 20 minutes with messages from a number registered to a holdings company in Macau that officially did not exist. She had not answered them, not yet. She crossed to the window and pressed one palm flat against the glass. Manhattan spread below her in its magnificent, merciless sprawl. She had been in this city for 11 days, and already it felt like a position she had taken, a height she had climbed to and intended to hold. The messages would need answering soon. Cheon Sang-ho was not a patient man when his timelines were disrupted, and she had disrupted his timeline by moving faster than planned. The wedding was supposed to have happened. She was supposed to have spent 6 more months embedded in Tae-jun's life before making her move. But she had walked into that corridor and looked at him and felt something she hadn't entirely planned to feel. And she had moved on instinct, and the instinct had worked, and now she was here. The question was what here meant going forward. She picked up the phone. The message from the Macau number was brief. Timeline accelerated. Confirm status of account access. She stared at it. Then she typed back. Patience. I'm inside. She set the phone down. She turned back to the window. The sky above the city was clear today, a hard, cold blue, and the light hit the glass towers in a way that made them look like something assembled rather than built. Component parts fitted together in the service of an overall structure that was more impressive than any individual piece. She was good at structures. She always had been. She just needed Tae-jun to stay where he was long enough for her to understand all of it fully. She needed him present and distracted and still carrying the particular vulnerability that men carry when they have recently done something they cannot undo. She had seen it in his face in the corridor. She had seen it at the altar. She could work with it. What she had not planned for was Amara Coleman. She had done her research. She knew Amara's professional profile, her background, her financial position, her temperament. She had assessed her as a variable and determined she was manageable. A woman who had spent 3 years building her life around someone else's. A woman who, once removed from the structure, would need time to locate herself again. She had not planned for the letter, which she didn't know about. She had not planned for the London invitation, which she found out about 40 minutes later when she overheard Haewon's voice through the office door. She had not planned for the speed of it, the way Amara Coleman, instead of collapsing inward, had apparently turned immediately and started moving. Serena stood at the window for a long time. Then she opened her phone again and typed a second message to the Macau number. I need information on Coleman. Everything from the last 2 weeks. She sent it and put the phone in her pocket and looked at the city and thought about structures. About which ones were load-bearing. About which ones, if you removed the right element at the right time, would bring everything else down with them. She was still thinking about it when the door to the suite opened and Tae-jun walked in, and she saw immediately from the set of his jaw and the specific quality of stillness in his face that something had changed in the last hour, and the particular calculation she had been running in her head shifted, slightly but significantly. Like a building settling on its foundation after a tremor, it is absorbed but not yet fully processed. We need to talk, he said. Serena turned from the window and looked at him and smiled the way she had always smiled at him. Slowly, without showing all of it at once, the way you open a door just wide enough to let someone decide whether to step through. We do, she said. She had no idea yet that the conversation he was about to start would be the first thread pulled from a fabric she had spent 2 years weaving. She had no idea that Han's call had already happened, that the numbers in her account had already been seen by the wrong eyes, that the careful architecture of her deception had already developed its first visible crack. She smiled at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And in that moment, the thing between them, whatever it was, whatever it had ever been, balanced on its edge the way things balance just before they fall. In the last second when they are still technically upright, when the outcome is not yet decided, but the forces that will decide it are already fully in motion. He closed the door behind him and stood just inside it, and the suite felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago, the way rooms shrink when the specific weight of what is about to be said enters them ahead of the words. Serena kept her expression where she had put it. She was good at that. She had spent years learning the particular discipline of keeping her face one transaction behind her mind, and she deployed it now the way she deployed everything, as a tool, as a calculated advantage. You moved in, Tae-jun said. You didn't object. I wasn't asked. She tilted her head slightly. When have you ever needed to be asked before you said no to something? It was the right kind of deflection, so quick, with just enough truth in it to make him work for the counter. She watched him absorb it, watched the jaw. The jaw was always the tell with him, the one piece of his face he couldn't fully discipline. It moved now, just once. Han called me, he said. The temperature in the room changed. Not physically, in the way that certain sentences change the temperature of a room, by introducing information that alters the atmospheric pressure of everything around it. Serena said nothing. She was very still. He's been watching your accounts, Tae-jun said, for 4 months. Han watches everything. That's what you pay him for. There's money in your accounts that doesn't have an explanation. He took 2 steps into the room, stopped. I want you to explain it. She held his gaze. She had 3 possible responses, and she ran through them in the space of 2 seconds and selected the one that bought the most time. It's inheritance from my mother's estate. The Zurich account. It cleared in February. Your mother's estate was settled in 2019. Han has those records. A beat. Then it's investment income, she said. I have a portfolio manager in Serena. His voice had gone to the flat register, the one she hadn't heard since Seoul, since the worst of Seoul. Don't. She looked at him. He was standing 8 feet away from her with his hands at his sides, and his face in the configuration she recognized as the one he wore when he had already reached a conclusion and was waiting for the evidence to finish catching up with what he already knew. She had seen that face across a negotiating table once, years ago, directed at someone else, and the person it had been directed at had not recovered from that meeting. She made a decision. You want to have this conversation, she said. Then let's have it. But not like this. Not standing in a hotel suite like I'm being interrogated. You are being interrogated. She crossed her arms. Not defensively. deliberately, as a way of taking up space. Then you should have brought Han. Han is on a plane from Seoul. He lands in 6 hours. A pause. I wanted to talk to you first. Something in her calibration shifted. He had wanted to talk to her first. That meant something. Not tenderness, she was past reading it as that. But it meant he was not yet fully decided. It meant there was still a door. She uncrossed her arms. She moved toward him slowly, and she watched him, and he didn't step back, which was information. Taejun, she said. Quieter now. She put her hand on his arm. Whatever Han thinks he found, let me look at it. Let me show you what it actually is. You know me. You've known me for 17 years. Don't let one man's spreadsheet. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Then he stepped back, deliberately, as he had stepped back in the corridor on the morning of the 14th, and the specific quality of that movement, measured, final, the kind of step that has weight in it, told her the door she had thought was still open was in fact already closed. I need you to stay in this suite, he said. Don't make any calls. Don't contact anyone outside this building until Han arrives. Her eyes narrowed. You can't. I can. His voice was very quiet, very even. And I am. I'll have Marcus bring you dinner. He turned. Taejun. Her voice came out harder than she intended. If you do this, if you go down this road, you will regret it. He stopped. His back was to her. He stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame, and he was absolutely still for 3 seconds. I already regret things, he said. One more won't change the geometry. He left. The door clicked shut. Serena stood in the center of the suite and looked at the closed door and breathed very carefully through her nose and counted to 5. Then she crossed to the console table and picked up her phone. The Macau number had sent 2 more messages while she'd been talking. She read them. Then she walked to the window and stood for a moment looking at the city, and her expression, with no one to perform it for, settled into something altogether different from what she had been showing Taejun. Harder. More specific. The expression of a woman running a revised calculation on a situation that has moved faster than planned. She typed, he knows about the accounts. Need extraction window. 24 hours. She sent it. Then she sat down on the edge of the couch and thought very carefully about what she had and what she didn't have and where the exits were. London was gray and wet and indifferent, and Amara found it, for that reason, almost perfectly suited to the work. The Ashcroft Development Group occupied 4 floors of a Georgian building in Mayfair that had been gutted and rebuilt inside with the specific aesthetic restraint that serious European money prefers. No ostentation, everything functional and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when their beauty is not their primary purpose. Vivian Ashcroft herself was 71 years old, small, white-haired, with hands that were always moving and eyes that were absolutely still. And she had been responsible for more square footage of built environment in the past 40 years than most governments. She had called Amara directly. Not through an assistant, not through an intermediary. She had found the number herself and dialed it. And when Amara answered, she had said without preamble, I've been watching your work for 3 years. I'd like to discuss what you do next. Come to London. That had been 6 weeks ago. Amara was now sitting across from her in a conference room on the 3rd floor with the rain hitting the tall windows behind Vivian's head, and a set of Amara's conceptual drawings spread across the table between them. Vivian was looking at the drawings in the specific way she looked at everything. Not admiringly, not critically, but with the comprehensive attention of someone reading a language they know well. The load distribution here, Vivian said, tapping a finger on a detailed drawing of a structural cantilever. It's unconventional. It's more efficient than conventional, Amara said. I know, I had my engineer look at it. Vivian looked up. He said it was either reckless or brilliant, and he couldn't tell which without a full structural analysis. What did you tell him? Vivian's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. I told him to run the analysis. She pushed the drawings aside and folded her hands on the table. I want to be direct with you, Vivian said. I don't do partnerships. I have consultants. I have contractors. I have employees. I have not had a genuine partner in 30 years because the last one nearly cost me everything I'd built, and I decided the risk wasn't worth it. Amara said nothing. She was listening in the way she listened to difficult clients, completely, without filling the space. What I see in your work, Vivian continued, is someone who builds for longevity rather than impact, which is rare. Most architects build for photographs. You build for the next century. A pause. I want to know if you have the stomach for what comes with that. What comes with it? Scale. The kind of scale that changes skylines and upsets governments and makes you targets for everyone who profits from the way things currently are. Vivian looked at her steadily. And I want to know if the events of the last 2 months have altered your appetite for that, or increased it. There it was. Amara had expected it. She had been waiting for it in the way you wait for weather you've already seen forming on the horizon. You mean the wedding, Amara said. I mean what happened after it. The wedding itself doesn't interest me. What interests me is that within 6 weeks of the most public humiliation this city has produced in a decade, you got on a plane and came here with a portfolio under your arm. Vivian leaned forward slightly. That interests me very much. Amara looked at the drawings between them. Her drawings. 3 years of conceptual work she had developed in the margins of a life that had been organized around someone else's priorities. My grandmother left me a letter, Amara said. She said, stop letting their ceilings become your floors. Vivian was quiet. I've been building under other people's ceilings for a long time, Amara said. I'm done with that. Something in Vivian's expression settled. Not satisfaction, recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has heard a real answer after a long time of being offered performed ones. All right, Vivian said. She picked up one of the drawings. Then let's talk about Berlin. Han arrived at 9:47 in the evening, still carrying his travel bag, and Tae-jun had him brought directly to the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. Chae-won was already there. The table had 3 laptops open and a set of printed documents in a manila folder that Han placed in front of Tae-jun without comment. Han was 53, gray at the temples, thin in the way of a man who forgot to eat when he was working, which was always. He had been the Baeko Syndicate's primary financial analyst for 18 years. He did not speculate. He did not interpret. He laid out what the numbers said and let the numbers say it. Walk me through it, Tae-jun said. Han sat down and opened his laptop and turned it to face Tae-jun. These are the inflows to the account registered to Whitlock Holdings, LLC, Delaware Incorporation, opened 14 months ago. He pointed. This transfer, 4.2 million, February. The source is a shell registered in the Caymans that traces back through 4 layers to a holding structure used by the Cheon network. The room was quiet. This one, he scrolled. 7.8 million, April. Different shell, same network, different routing, same endpoint. He looked up. Someone was trying to make these untraceable. They used a good architect, but they made one consistent error. They used the same intermediary bank in Riga for every transfer. Different accounts, different dates, same bank. That's what Han found. Chae-won was looking at the screen. His face was very still. How much total? Tae-jun said. In 14 months, confirmed, with documentation, $31 million. A pause. There are 3 additional transfers I can't yet confirm the source of. If those are also Cheon network money, the total is closer to 47. Tae-jun looked at the screen. $47 million. Over 14 months. Moving through Serena Whitlock's accounts in carefully constructed layers, clean enough to pass a casual review, not clean enough to survive Han. What was it for? He said. Han turned to the folder. He opened it to the 3rd page. The outflows tell a different story than the inflows. The money doesn't stay in the Whitlock accounts. It moves, within days of each deposit, to 2 destinations. The first is a security consultancy in Prague that provides intelligence and surveillance services. The clients of that consultancy include several organizations in direct competition with Baeko's legitimate holdings. He paused. The second destination is a financial research firm in Singapore. Their primary product is detailed intelligence reports on the internal structure of major financial syndicates. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of people processing information, the silence of people who have already processed it and are sitting with what it means. She was buying information about us, Chae-won said. Not a question. No, Han said. He turned to the next page. She was selling it. He placed 3 documents side by side on the table. They were reports. Detailed, structured, professionally formatted reports with cover pages that bore the logo of the Singapore firm. Each one was titled differently. The first, Bejo Syndicate, European Asset Structure Q3. The second, Kang Global Investment Group, Partnership Network Analysis. The third had no subtitle. Its title was Personal Security Profile, Kang Tae-jun. Tae-jun looked at the third document. He picked it up. It was 11 pages. It contained his daily routine, his security detail rotations, the locations of 3 properties that were not registered in his name, the names of 4 individuals who served as intermediaries between his legitimate corporate structure and the syndicate's financial network, and a section at the back, 6 pages, that mapped in precise detail the relationship between the Bejo Syndicate's internal financial architecture and 3 specific accounts that were used to move money between the legitimate and illegitimate sides of his operation. His hands were still. He was aware of them being still in the specific way you are aware of your own steadiness when the alternative is destruction. He set the document down. How long has she been inside the building? He said. You met her in the corridor on the morning of the 14th, Jae-won said carefully. 11 days ago. She moved into the suite 3 days later. Yes. She's had access to this floor, to the executive corridor, to my calendar, my meetings, my... He stopped. I've already had IT run a full audit, Jae-won said. She accessed the executive server twice. The guest credentials she was given were supposed to have read-only access to the hospitality network. Someone elevated her permissions. Who? Jae-won's expression tightened. We're working on that. Who? Tae-jun said again. We think it was Park Soo-hyun, your communications manager. She and Serena had been in contact for approximately 8 months before the pup. He stopped himself again. Before the 14th. We think Park was recruited first, as an inside contact. Tae-jun looked at the table, at the documents spread across it, at the specific geography of a betrayal that had been constructed around him with the patience and precision of a man who had spent 14 years waiting for exactly this kind of access. Cheon Sang-ho, who had been building toward this for longer than Serena had been in the picture. Who had identified the one specific vulnerability in Tae-jun's operation? Not financial, not structural, but human, emotional. He had been the vulnerability. He had walked into a corridor on the morning of his wedding and stood there and let 17 years of old feeling override 14 years of earned discipline, and in doing so had opened a door that Cheon Sang-ho had been waiting 14 years for someone to open. And Amara Coleman had been in a bridal suite 3 floors above, in an ivory dress she had designed herself, holding white flowers she had chosen herself, waiting. The specific weight of that settled somewhere in his chest that was not his lungs and not his heart, but the space between them where things land when they are too heavy to classify. Where is she now? He said. Suite 44. Marcus has 2 men on the door. Her phone... Chaewon hesitated. Her phone was active 40 minutes ago. She made 1 outgoing message to an unregistered number. Pull the suite's network access. Isolate her device. He stood. And get Park Soo-hyun in a room. Tonight. Tae-jun... Jae-won stood as well. If we move on Serena now, before we know the full extent of what she's shared, we risk tipping off Cheon before we understand what he has. I know. If Cheon already has the profile document, the one with the account structures, then we have a window of maybe 72 hours before he uses it. After that, I know, Jae-won. His voice was flat and precise and entirely without temperature. That's why we're moving tonight, not tomorrow. He picked up the personal security profile from the table, the 11-page document with his name on the cover. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down and walked to the door, and his hands were still, and his face was in the configuration. It went to when the decision had been made and what remained was only execution. He stepped into the corridor. The building hummed around him with its late-night skeleton crew energy, reduced staff, dimmed lights in the secondary hallways, the distant sound of cleaning equipment somewhere below. He walked toward the elevator bank. He stopped. There was one more thing. He had been not thinking it since Han put the documents on the table, which meant he had been thinking about it constantly, which was how he thought about things he wasn't ready to face, by surrounding them with attention while refusing to look directly. Serena had appeared in that corridor on the morning of the 14th. She had found him. She had kissed him. He had let her. He had walked into the ballroom with her, and he had destroyed in 3 minutes something that had been built over 3 years. He had done it. That was true, and it stayed true regardless of Cheon Sang-ho, regardless of the manipulation, regardless of the constructed architecture of the betrayal that had been assembled around him with expert patience. He had still done it. Amara Coleman was in London right now. He knew this because Chaewon had told him, and because Marcus's detail had reported it before he'd pulled them off. And she was there because she had taken her grandmother's letter and her own drawings and turned herself in 6 weeks from the woman standing in an ivory dress in a Manhattan hotel lobby into something that was moving forward at a speed he had not anticipated and would not have predicted, because he had never, in 3 years, fully looked at what she was capable of when she was allowed to move. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He got in and pressed 44 and watched the doors close and stood in the small metal box going up 2 floors and breathed in and out, steady, as the building moved around him and above him. Serena Whitlock was sitting in his suite with her phone isolated and 2 men on the door. And below him, Han and Jaewon were beginning the process of dismantling a conspiracy that had been built inside his life with his own grief as the primary building material. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. He stepped into the corridor and looked at the 2 men standing outside Suite 44 and nodded once, and one of them opened the door, and Tae-jun walked through it into the room where the woman who had destroyed him was waiting. And he looked at her, and she looked at him. And what passed between them in that moment was not anger and not sorrow, but something colder and more final. The specific look that passes between 2 people when all the pretending is over and what remains is only the truth of what was done and what it cost and who is left standing. "It's over, Serena," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face changed. Not collapsed, not crumbled, but shifted, the way a mask shifts when the person wearing it decides for the first time to let you see the edge of it. "You have no idea," she said quietly, "how much I actually wanted it not to be." She didn't cry. He had half expected her to, not from weakness. He'd never made the mistake of reading Serena as weak, but as a tactical move, the way she deployed everything, as a tool shaped to the moment. But she didn't. She sat on the edge of the couch with her hands in her lap and looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been running a very long race and has just, for the first time, allowed herself to feel how tired her legs are. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand." "Tae-jun, sit down. You look like you're about to execute someone, and I'd like to have this conversation like 2 adults. He stayed where he was. His hands were at his sides. He was aware of the door behind him, of the 2 men outside it, of the specific quality of silence in the building at this hour. Reduced, skeletal, the kind of quiet that makes every sound carry farther than it should. "Cheon Sang-ho," he said. She didn't flinch. He watched for it, and it didn't come, which told him something. That she had been expecting this name to enter the room, that she had prepared for it, that the preparation had been sufficient. "What about him?" "How long?" She looked at her hands, then back up. 3 years. 3 years. He did the math without wanting to. 3 years ago, he had been in the middle of the Baiko Syndicate's largest legitimate expansion, European holdings, American real estate, the beginnings of the investment group's public profile. 3 years ago, he had met Amara Coleman at a Columbia University fundraiser, and she had looked at the architectural rendering on the wall behind his head and told him, without knowing who he was, that the building's cantilever was going to fail within 20 years because the engineer had prioritized aesthetics over load distribution, and he had thought, this woman is not performing anything. 3 years ago, Serena had already been inside Cheon Sang-ho's operation. "He came to me," Serena said. "I didn't go looking for it." "That's not a distinction that matters." "It matters to me." She stood now slowly and crossed to the window. The city was brilliant below them, indifferent and enormous. "He had information about Seoul, about what I did during the gang war, the things I did to survive that I never told you about. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would send it to you. He said you'd—" She stopped. "He said you'd have me dealt with." "Dealt with," Tae-jun repeated. Those were his words. "And you believed them." I believed them because I knew you. She turned from the window. I knew what you were capable of. I had seen it, and so when he said it, I thought, yes, that's exactly what he would do. Because that's what men like you do when someone becomes a liability. The room was very still. Taejun looked at her, and somewhere beneath the flatness of his operational register something was moving, something unpleasant and complex because she was not entirely wrong, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it sat between them like a third presence in the room. So you gave him my accounts, he said, my security profile, my network. Slowly, over time, I gave him enough to keep him satisfied without giving him enough to actually... She stopped. I thought I could control how much he used. I thought I could manage the flow of it. You thought you could manage Cheon Sang-ho. I know how that sounds. It sounds like someone who underestimated a man who has been dismantling organizations for 30 years. His voice was still flat. The flatness was not calm. It was the thing that exists beneath calm when calm has been removed. What did he promise you? She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that contains a decision about how much of the truth to spend. The Whitlock Holdings accounts were his money laundering, she said. I was a conduit. In exchange, he promised to destroy the evidence he had on me. And he promised... She looked at him directly. He promised me a percentage of whatever he took from your legitimate holdings once the syndicate's financial structure was exposed. The number on Han's documents surfaced in his mind. 47 million in, 2 years of intelligence out. The Prague security consultancy, the Singapore firm, the reports with his name on the cover. How much of it has he already used? Taejun said. I don't know. Serena, I genuinely don't know. He stopped telling me the operational details 6 months ago. After the 14th, she pressed her fingers against her temple. After I moved things faster than he'd planned. He was angry. He said I'd compromised the timeline by making a personal decision. You did make a personal decision. She looked at him, and here was the thing that made it complicated. The thing that sat underneath the betrayal and the calculation and the architecture of the deception. In her eyes, right now, with the mask fully off and nothing left to protect, was something that was not performed. It was real, and it was painful, and it was, in its way, worse than the rest of it. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Taejun looked away. He looked at the window, at the city, at the lights. Marcus is going to take you downstairs, he said. You're going to sit with Han, and you're going to tell him everything. Every transfer, every contact, every piece of information you passed. You're going to give him Cheon's operational contacts and whatever you know about the Singapore firm's distribution network. And if I do? Then I deal with Cheon directly and you disappear, quietly, with enough to start over somewhere that isn't here. And if I don't? He turned back to her. Then I give Han's documents to the 3 federal agencies who have been building a case against the Cheon network for 6 years, and your name is on every page of the cooperation agreement. She held his gaze for a long time. The city moved below them. Somewhere in the building, a door closed, distant and final. All right, she said. He nodded once. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on it. The corridor, he said. On the 14th. Did Cheon tell you to do that? To find me that morning specifically? A pause. Long enough to be its own answer. Yes, she said. The timing was his. He wanted you destabilized before the wedding. He said a man in emotional chaos makes structural errors. She looked at her hands. He was right. Taejun opened the door. The next 40 hours were the kind of hours that don't feel like hours. They feel like a single sustained event. A continuous present tense with no seams, during which Taejun slept for 90 minutes on the couch in the executive conference room and ate half a sandwich that Chaewon put in front of him at 3 a.m. and drank enough coffee to be functional without being anything else. Han worked through the night. Serena gave him 8 hours of detailed testimony that he cross-referenced in real time against the financial records. And by 6 a.m, they had a complete picture of the Cheon network's access to the Baeko Syndicate's legitimate financial architecture. It was not as bad as Taejun had feared. It was worse in 2 specific areas and better in 3 others. The personal security profile was the most dangerous piece. It had been distributed to 2 parties beyond Cheon, both in Asia, both connected to organizations that had long-standing grievances with the Baco Syndicate. They have your routine, Han said, placing a page in front of him. You're building entry points, the names of your 2 personal security leads. This needs to change today. All of it. Done. The account structures are more complicated. The 3 intermediary accounts that appear in the profile document. We need to close those and reconstruct the network through different channels. That's a 6-week process minimum. Start it. There's also the question of the Singapore firm. They've already published one analysis. Not publicly, it's a private distribution to their client list, but it's out. We can't unpublish it. What we can do is introduce enough discrepancy into the public record to undermine its credibility. Do it. Jaewon was standing at the window with his arms folded, looking at the early morning sky. He had been mostly silent for the last 2 hours, which was not his usual mode and meant he was working up to something. Say it, Taejun said. Jaewon turned. Cheon Sang-ho knows that Serena is in this building. He knows she went dark last night. No contact, no confirmation. He's going to assume she's been compromised. I know, which means he's going to move on whatever timeline he has. The account structures, the security profile. He may already be positioning to use them. I know. We have maybe 36 hours before he decides waiting is more dangerous than acting. Chaewon paused. We need to get to him first. Taejun looked at the page in front of him, the account structures, his name on the security profile, the work of 14 years of careful, disciplined construction, mapped out and distributed by a woman he had once trusted with things that were not safe to trust with anyone. Set up the soul call, he said. I want the 3 senior partners on the line by noon, and get me a direct contact for the federal task force that's been building the Cheon case. Chaewon raised an eyebrow. Legitimate means, Taejun said. That's what we're doing, all of it through legitimate channels. A pause. Cheon built this attack on the assumption that I would respond the old way, that I would move in the dark, make it disappear, use the same tools he used against me. He looked up. I'm not going to do that. Taejun, the syndicate's legitimate holdings are worth more than revenge. The investment group, the development partnerships, the infrastructure projects, that is what survives. That is what I protect. And I protect it by letting the people whose job it is to dismantle Cheon do their job with the evidence we hand them. Jaewon was quiet. Then he nodded. It'll take the pressure off the Mercer Group. It'll take the pressure off everything. Because once Cheon is inside a federal investigation, anyone he's distributed that intelligence to has a very strong incentive to distance themselves from it immediately. Han looked up from his laptop. That's actually... Yes, that is correct. Taejun stood. He rolled down his sleeves and fastened his cuffs and straightened his jacket and looked at the documents on the table. The full architecture of the betrayal, laid out flat under the conference room lights. Make the calls, he said. In Berlin, 6 weeks after the London meeting, Amara Coleman stood on a wind-scoured construction site on the eastern bank of the Spree and looked at the ground that would become the most ambitious, sustainable, mixed-use development in European history, and felt the specific satisfaction of a person who has correctly identified the right problem and is now in the process of solving it. The Berlin project was Vivian's introduction. The commission had come through the Ashcroft Group's existing European relationships, and the scope of it, 400,000 square meters, integrated green infrastructure, a residential tower that would be the first of its kind to achieve full carbon neutrality at scale, was exactly the kind of problem Amara had been building toward without knowing it for the better part of a decade. She had an office now, in Clerkenwell, with 3 architects she'd hired from practices in London and Amsterdam and Seoul, and a project manager named Dio, who had 15 years of large-scale infrastructure experience and communicated primarily in precise, undecorated sentences that Amara found professionally satisfying. She was building Coleman International Design. She was building it the way she built everything, structurally, load by load, no element that didn't serve the whole. She was working 14-hour days and sleeping well, which was not something she had expected, but turned out to be one of the more reliable signals that she was doing the right thing. When she had been in New York, managing the peripheral demands of a life organized around Taejun's orbit, she had slept badly and called it normal. Priya had come to London for a weekend in March, and they had sat in Amara's small flat in Clerkenwell, eating takeaway on the floor, and Priya had looked at her and said, "You look different." Different how? Like you're inside your own life again. Amara had thought about that for a moment. I forgot I'd left it. The Berlin site was cold today, the wind coming hard off the river, and she had her collar up and her drawings rolled under one arm, and she was talking to the lead structural engineer, a German man named Brandt, who was rigorous and skeptical, and had pushed back on 3 of her load calculations before she'd walked him through the math, and he'd gone quiet in the particular way of someone who has been shown they were wrong, and is processing it with professional dignity. The cantilever still concerns me, he said. He said it in English because his English was better than her German, which she was working on. The cantilever is the point, she said. The conventional approach puts the stress load here. She unrolled the drawing and held it against the wind with both hands. I'm distributing it here and here. The result is 20% greater load capacity and a material reduction of 15%. The margin is thin. The margin is correct. She looked at him. Run the model again with the updated figures I sent yesterday. Then call me. Brandt looked at her. He was 60, had built things all over Europe, and had an expression he wore when he was deciding whether someone knew what they were talking about or merely sounded like they did. He wore it now. Then he put it away. I'll call you, he said. She rolled the drawings back up and walked back across the site toward the temporary site office, and the wind came off the river and the city spread around her in its vast, layered, continuous way. And she thought, without intending to, about Manhattan. About standing in a car going north through the rain in an ivory dress. About the distance between that moment and this one, measured not in miles or months, but in the specific unit of change that has no name, the thing that accumulates when a person stops surviving and starts building. Her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number, U.S. country code. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Amara Coleman. A pause. Then, it's Nathaniel Roth. She stopped walking. Nathaniel Roth was not an unknown number. He was a billionaire philanthropist whose foundation had funded 3 major urban redevelopment projects in American cities, and whose investment group had been quietly following Coleman International Design's early work through the Ashcroft connection. Mr. Roth, she said. I've been looking at your Berlin proposal, he said. His voice was direct and unhurried, the voice of a man who has learned that certainty is its own efficiency. I think you're about to do something that changes how cities are built. I'd like to be part of it. She stood on the construction site with the wind in her face and the river behind her and the city of Berlin spread out in every direction, and she thought about her grandmother's letter, about ceilings and floors, about the specific architecture of a life rebuilt from its own wreckage. Tell me what you have in mind, she said. The call with Cheon Sang-ho happened at 11:15 at night, New York time, which was noon in Seoul, and it was not the call Cheon had been expecting. He had been expecting silence or panic, or the sound of a man trying to negotiate from a weakened position. He had been running his operation against the Bayeko Syndicate for 14 years with the patience of someone who understands that large structures fall slowly and the work is in the waiting, and he had expected the exposure of the intelligence network to produce scrambling, reactive, defensive, the behavior of a man who has discovered a problem and is trying to contain it before it spreads. He did not expect to pick up the phone and hear Tae-jun's voice at its flattest register, naming, one by one, the 4 federal agencies in 3 countries that had received coordinated intelligence packages in the last 6 hours, detailing the full extent of the Cheon Network's financial operations, its shell company infrastructure, its distribution of stolen corporate intelligence, and its connections to 3 organized crime organizations under active international investigation. There was a silence on the line. You understand what you've done, Cheon said. His English was excellent. He used it, Tae-jun had always thought, because he believed it made him sound like a man who operated above the level of national allegiance. I've handed your operation to people who will spend the next 3 years dismantling it piece by piece with full legal authority, Tae-jun said. Yes, I understand what I've done. You've also handed them pieces of your own structure. I've handed them pieces I can afford to lose. You handed them your entire network. A pause. You made the same mistake you always make, Cheon. You assumed I would respond the way I would have responded 15 years ago. You built a strategy around a version of me that no longer exists. Another silence, longer this time. You still lost her, Cheon said. It was not a non sequitur. It was a precise, targeted strike. The last available weapon, deployed with the accuracy of a man who knows when everything else is gone. Whatever you do to me, you still walked into that ballroom and threw away the one person who was actually worth something, and you did it because I told a woman to kiss you in a corridor and you didn't have the character to. Taejun ended the call. He set the phone down on the conference table and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the surface and his breathing at a rate he was consciously keeping even, and the building was quiet around him, and through the windows, the Manhattan skyline was doing what it always did, blazing, relentless, entirely indifferent. You still lost her. Chaewon was standing by the door. He had heard the call. He said nothing. Taejun looked at his hands on the table. He thought about the corridor, the kiss, the ballroom, the specific sound of the string quartet stopping, instrument by instrument, when 500 people realized the groom was standing at the back of the room with someone else. He thought about Amara's face in that moment. Not the expression she had shown the room, the composed, deliberate, load-bearing face that had carried her out through the doors and into the lobby and into the car. He thought about the 2 seconds before she assembled that face. The 2 seconds when she was just a woman who had trusted the wrong structure and felt it give way beneath her. He had done that. Cheon Sang-ho had engineered the conditions, but Taejun had done it. That distinction was small comfort. It was, in fact, no comfort at all. "What do you need?" Chaewon said quietly. Taejun looked up. "I need 6 months," he said, "to rebuild the financial network cleanly, to cooperate with the federal investigation on the Cheon side without exposing what needs to stay protected, to restructure the European partnerships." He paused. "And then I need to be in New York." "For the Mercer deal?" He looked at his hands again. "There's a project," he said, "a cultural center, waterfront development, Manhattan. It was awarded to Coleman International Design 3 weeks ago." A pause. "The Legacy Awards ceremony is in 6 months. She'll be there." Chaewon was very still. "Taejun, I know." He pushed back from the table and stood. "I know what I'm saying. I know there's no version of that conversation that goes well for me." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm not going for a version that goes well for me. I'm going because some things need to be said to a person's face, and this is one of them." He put his jacket on. "Get some sleep," he said to Chaewon. "We have 6 months of reconstruction ahead of us, and I need you functional." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, the same frame he'd stopped at twice in the last 40 hours. The same gesture, but carrying different weight now. The weight of something that has been examined fully and accepted fully and is being carried forward rather than set down. "She's building something extraordinary," he said. Not to Chaewon specifically. To the room, to the city, to whatever part of himself was still capable of saying a true thing about someone he had failed without making it about his own failure. "She was always going to build something extraordinary. He stopped. "I just didn't look," he said. He walked into the corridor. The elevator was waiting. He got in and the doors closed and he stood in the small metal box going down through the building, and 42 floors below the city waited. The same city, the same skyline, the same indifferent magnificence. And 6 months from tonight, in a different season, under a different sky, Amara Coleman would stand in front of that skyline, having built something that would outlast both of them. And Taejun was going to stand in front of her with nothing but the truth of what he'd done, and the words he should have said before any of it happened. And it was not going to be enough, and he knew it was not going to be enough, and he was going to say it anyway. The elevator hit the ground floor. The doors opened. He walked out into the lobby, into the night, into the city that kept moving regardless of what any single person did or didn't do within it, and the air outside was cold and clean, and somewhere across the Atlantic, in a flat in Clerkenwell with architectural drawings spread across every available surface, Amara Coleman was already building the next thing, and the next, and the next, each one larger and more durable than the last, and she was not thinking about him at all. That was the truest and most deserved thing in the world, and it was the thing that hurt the most completely. 6 months is enough time to rebuild a financial network. It is not enough time to rebuild a person. But it is, Taejun had learned, enough time to begin, which is a different thing, a smaller and more honest thing, and he had spent those 6 months learning the difference between the two. The Cheon network's dismantling had taken 11 weeks from the night of the call to the first set of arrests in Seoul. The federal cooperation had been exactly as costly as he'd anticipated. 3 of the Bayako syndicate's intermediary accounts were frozen as part of the investigation. 2 European partnerships were suspended pending legal review. And the Kang Global Investment Group's public profile took damage that 4 separate communications teams spent the better part of 3 months managing. It was not clean. It was not painless. It was, as Jaewon had predicted, the most expensive legitimate decision Tae-jun had made in 15 years of running operations that frequently chose the other kind. He made it anyway. He made it every day it needed to be made, which was most days. And on the days it was hardest, he thought about what he had said in the conference room. Cheon built this attack on the assumption that I would respond the old way. And he held on to it not as inspiration but as a technical requirement, the way you hold on to a load-bearing calculation when everything else is telling you to simplify. Park Soo-hyun had been quietly let go with a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure. She was 28 years old and had been recruited by Cheon's network before she fully understood what she was being recruited into, and Tae-jun had looked at her across a table in a lawyer's office and seen in her face the specific expression of someone who has been used by a larger force and is only now understanding the full shape of what they participated in. He had not forgiven her. He had also not destroyed her. It was not generosity. It was a decision about what kind of man he was rebuilding himself into. And that man did not ruin 28-year-olds for being naive. Serena had disappeared. He had kept his word. She had given Han everything, and he had given her a wire transfer and a one-way ticket, and the understanding that her name would not appear in any document that moved through the federal investigation unless she made it necessary. He did not know where she went. He did not want to know. What she had said in the suite, the part about soul, about fear, about not knowing what he was capable of, sat with him in a place he didn't examine often, but didn't pretend wasn't there. It didn't excuse what she'd done. It didn't require excusing. It was simply true alongside everything else, the way complicated things are true, without resolving into anything clean. The Manhattan Cultural Center had been completed in October. He had followed its construction from a distance, through press releases and architectural publications, and once, a set of photographs published in an international design journal that showed Amara Coleman standing on the building's upper terrace during a site inspection, wearing a hard hat over her work clothes, holding a set of rolled drawings, looking at something above the frame of the shot with the specific focused attention of someone who has seen what they built and checking it against what they intended. She looked, in the photographs, exactly like what she was, a person entirely at home in the work. The Legacy Awards ceremony was on a Friday evening in November. Tae-jun had not been invited. He had not tried to be. He put on a dark suit in his apartment on the Upper East Side and took a car to the venue and gave his name to the door and was admitted because his name still opened doors in the city, and he found a position in the back of the room where he could see the stage without being immediately visible, and he stood there and waited. The Coleman Cultural Center had already changed the conversation about what was possible on Manhattan's waterfront before a single program had been held inside it. Architecturally, it was the thing that Amara had been moving toward her entire career, a building that justified its own existence not through aesthetic impact but through functional intelligence, every surface and angle and structural choice serving the life of the people who would move through it for the next 100 years. Vivienne Ashcroft had called it the most significant piece of American civic architecture since the last century. Nathaniel Roth's foundation had co-funded the scholarship program that would run out of it. 400 scholarships annually for students from underserved communities pursuing careers in architecture, urban planning, and environmental design. Amara had stood on the opening night and looked at it from across the plaza and felt the thing you feel when a building you designed is finally inhabited. Not pride exactly, though there was pride in it, but something closer to recognition, like meeting someone you have been corresponding with for years. The Legacy Awards were a different kind of night. More formal, more performed, the specific ritual of an institution honoring its own, which Amara had learned to navigate with the same professional composure she brought to everything. She sat at the front table with Vivian on her left and Nathaniel Roth on her right and Priya 2 seats down, and she listened to the speeches and applauded at the appropriate moments and kept her face in the composed, pleasant register she had learned to wear for public occasions without it costing her anything real. When they called her name, she walked to the stage. The award was a piece of glass, heavy and beveled, catching the light in the way that symbolic objects are designed to catch it. She held it and looked out at the room, the tables and the people, and the particular Manhattan intersection of money and culture and ambition. And she thought about what she wanted to say. She had prepared remarks. Dio had helped her organize them, and Priya had reviewed them, and Vivian had read them and said, "This is correct, but it isn't true yet. Finish writing it." She had finished writing it 3 days ago, alone in the Clerkenwell office after everyone else had left, sitting at her desk with a cup of cold coffee and the city outside the window doing its London thing, damp and gray and quietly persistent. "I want to talk about material," she said. The room settled. In architecture, material selection is about more than aesthetics or cost. It's about understanding what a substance does under pressure, what it does when the load exceeds what it was designed to carry, whether it fails suddenly or slowly, whether it gives warning or just gives way. She paused. I spent a long time thinking of myself as someone who had failed under load, who had been built for one thing and then found out, in public, that the structure I'd been relying on wasn't sound. The room was very quiet. What I understand now is that I was the structure, not what I was building around, not who I was building beside. She looked down at the award in her hands, then back up. The load didn't break me. It just redistributed into things that were actually mine. She talked for 7 more minutes about the scholarship program, about the students she had already met, 17 and 18 years old, with the specific hunger of people who have been told the room isn't for them and have decided to build their own. About what cities are for, not as monuments to the people who could afford to shape them, but as structures in service of the people who live inside them. When she finished, the room stood up. She walked back to her table and Vivian put one hand briefly on her arm and said nothing, which was exactly right, and Nathaniel leaned over and said quietly, "That was the most honest speech I've heard in this room in 20 years. And Priya was looking at her with an expression that contained in its specific configuration approximately 3 years of held breath finally released. Amara sat down and held her glass award and breathed. Hot. The terrace was on the building's north side, a long, narrow space with a stone balustrade and a view across the water to the lights of the bridges. And it was cold in November, cold enough that the party had retreated inside and left it empty. Amara had slipped out 20 minutes after the ceremony ended, not from unhappiness, but from the specific social saturation point she reached at large events, the point where the noise stopped being manageable and the face she wore for rooms started to feel like weight. She stood at the balustrade with her coat over her shoulders and looked at the water and the bridges and the city going about its Friday night, and she was thinking about the Berlin project. The second phase had been approved last month, the timeline extended another 18 months, and she had 3 new hires starting in January. When she heard the door behind her open, she knew before she turned. She didn't know how. Something in the specific quality of the footstep, or something older than that. Something that the body retains long after the mind has moved on. Kang Tae-jun crossed the terrace and stopped 6 feet away from her and stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at her with the expression she had seen on his face only once before. On a rooftop in Seoul, 2 in the morning, when he had said, "I want you to be my wife." The expression of a man who has stopped managing his own face. He looked older. Not badly, just more specific, the way certain kinds of difficulty make people more themselves rather than less. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know. I didn't invite you. I know that too." She turned back to the water. "Tae-jun, I'm not here to ask for anything." His voice was quiet, careful in the way that things are careful when they have been prepared over a long time. "I just need to say something, and then I'll go." She said nothing. The city below them continued its motion. Lights on the water, traffic on the bridge, the low ambient sound of a million separate lives running their concurrent courses. "I walked into that corridor," he said, "because I was afraid." She turned slightly, just enough to see his profile. "Not of you. Not of... I was afraid of what you were becoming, what you already were. You were building something that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with who you actually are, and I think..." He stopped, tried again. "I think some part of me understood that if you became fully what you were going to become, I would have to look at what I had done with my own life and answer for it. and I wasn't ready to do that. He paused. Serena was someone I could stand next to without that question being asked, because she was already part of the thing I was. Amara was quiet. The wind came off the water and moved through her coat, and she pressed her hands against the balustrade and felt the cold stone under her palms and grounded herself in it. That's not absolution, she said. Not hard, not bitter, precise. I know. You made that choice. Everything that was in you that knew better. It was all there, and you made the choice anyway. Yes. I walked that aisle, she said. I stood there. She stopped. She had not said this to anyone, not to Priya, not to Vivian, not to anyone. She had built around it for 3 years instead of through it. I knew something was wrong that morning. I felt it, and I walked anyway because I thought love was supposed to be the thing you go toward even when it frightens you. I thought I was being brave. She exhaled. I was just being willing to ignore what I already knew. Taejun was very still. That part is mine, she said. I'm not giving it to you. I did that. I own it. She looked at him finally, directly, the full weight of her attention. But the rest of it, the ballroom, the cameras, the 500 people, that is yours. Entirely. And you should carry it, not as punishment, just as the true weight of what a choice like that cost. I know what it cost, he said. Do you? He looked at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes were the eyes of a man who has not slept well in 6 months and has stopped pretending otherwise. I know that I threw away the most honest thing in my life because I wasn't brave enough to deserve it. I know that you built something extraordinary in the time it took me to finish making the mistake I started that morning. I know that there is nothing I can offer you that compensates for what I took from you. He paused. And I know that you are the only person I have ever stood in front of who made me want to be something better than what I am. Not because you asked me to, just by being what you are. The river moved below them. The bridges lit the water in long gold lines. Amar looked at him for a long time. I forgave you, she said. Not for you, for me. Because I couldn't build anything new while I was still holding the weight of it, and I needed my hands free. She looked back at the water. That forgiveness doesn't mean what you're hoping it means. I'm not hoping it means anything. Taejun, I'm not. His voice was steady. I'm not standing here asking to come back. I'm standing here because I owed you the truth of what I understand now, face to face, without a room full of people between us. That's all. She was quiet. The cold moved through the space between them. How are you? She said. Not warmly, not coldly. As one person speaks to another when the performances are done, and what remains is just the human fact of 2 lives that touched and separated and are still, somehow, here. He seemed to weigh the question. Rebuilding, he said. Your network. That too. Something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way a surface shifts when the pressure underneath it changes. I heard about the federal cooperation, she said. Vivian has contacts in the European regulatory space. She mentioned it. A pause. That wasn't the choice I expected you to make. It was the right one. It was expensive. Yes. She looked at him. You're different, she said. Not as a compliment, as an observation. I'm trying to be. She studied him for another moment, the specific comprehensive look she gave to structures she was assessing, looking for load distribution, for the placement of stress, for what was weight-bearing and what was decorative. He let her look. He had nothing to conceal. Nathaniel Roth is going to come through that door in about 4 minutes, she said. He's very protective. Priya is worse. I know. So, he reached into his coat pocket. He took out an envelope, small, cream-colored, sealed. He held it out to her. I wrote it down. Everything I just said, and some things I couldn't say out loud. I've been writing it for 4 months. He paused. You don't have to read it. You can throw it in the river, but I needed you to have it. She looked at the envelope. She looked at his hand holding it. She thought about her grandmother's letter, the one she had found in the second drawer of the writing desk under a road map and a bundle of unplanted seeds. The one that had said, stop letting their ceilings become your floors. She took the envelope. She put it in the pocket of her coat without looking at it. "I'm going back inside," she said. "I'll take a different exit." She moved toward the door. She stopped. "Are you happy?" she said. She asked it the way she asked difficult structural questions, directly, without softening it, because the answer mattered and softening it would corrupt the answer. He considered it. She watched him consider it, watched the particular quality of honesty that crossed his face when he stopped managing it. "Not yet," he said, "but I think I understand now what it would require." A pause. "That's further than I've ever gotten." She nodded once. She put her hand on the door. "Taejun." He looked at her. "Build something," she said. "Not for the syndicate, not for the network. Something that you could put your name on and have it mean something other than power." She held his gaze. "You have that in you. You always did. You were just pointing it at the wrong things." She opened the door. The warmth and noise of the party came through it, and the light, and the sound of several hundred people talking, and the string quartet that had started up again in the main hall, and all of it was life continuing in its ordinary, relentless way, which was the most extraordinary thing about it. She went inside. The terrace was empty. Taejun stood at the balustrade where she had been standing, and looked at the water and the bridges and the city, and he was very still, and his hands were in his pockets, and his face was turned toward the river with the expression of a man who has said the thing he needed to say and received neither more nor less than he deserved. He stayed for 3 minutes, long enough to feel the cold fully and let it be the temperature of the moment without trying to manage it. Then he walked to the north exit and took the stairs down and came out onto the waterfront plaza and began walking. He didn't take a car. He walked south along the water, hands in his pockets. The city spread around him in its constant, luminous indifference. Cabs and cyclists and couples and groups of young people moving between bars. All of it in motion, all of it continuous, none of it waiting for any single person's resolution. He walked for an hour. He ended up standing outside the building where his offices were, looking up at the lit windows on the upper floors, and he thought about what she had said. Build something, not for the syndicate, something with your name on it that means something other than power. He thought about the Berlin project that Coleman International Design was running, the second phase, the expanded scope, the residential tower that would be the first of its kind to achieve carbon neutrality at scale. He thought about infrastructure, about the legitimate side of what he had built and what it could become if it were pointed at something beyond its own perpetuation. It was not a plan. Not yet. It was the beginning of a question, which was different and more honest and the right place to start. He went inside. Amara read the letter at 2 a.m, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed with her coat still on and her shoes off, and the city outside the window doing its sleepless thing. She read it the way she had read her grandmother's letter, twice, the second time more slowly. It was 4 pages, handwritten, and it was the truest thing she had ever seen him produce. It was not an apology in the conventional sense. He had already apologized, and they both understood that the word itself was insufficient to the scale of what had happened. It was instead a kind of accounting, a line-by-line ledger of what he had understood and when he had understood it and what he had done and failed to do and chosen and failed to choose. It was painful to read, not because it was excessive, but because it was precise. And precision in a person who has spent their life weaponizing it and is now turning it on themselves is a different and more difficult instrument. At the end, he had written, "I don't expect this letter to change anything. I wrote it because you deserved the full truth of it, and because I needed to be someone who could write it. Whether those are the same thing, I'm still not sure. But you were right that morning in the bridal suite. I was afraid of what I was about to do, and I did it anyway. And I have spent 6 months understanding what it means to make a choice in full awareness of its cost and make it regardless. The difference is, I'm trying to make different choices now. That's not a completion. It's a beginning. I know the difference." She folded the letter along its original creases. She held it for a while. Then she put it in the inside pocket of her coat. Not the way you discard something, and not the way you keep something you intend to return to, but the way you acknowledge a thing that is true and complete and done, the way you file something that has been resolved. She took off her coat. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the city outside and breathed, slowly, in the way you breathe when the thing you have been carrying for a long time is not gone, but is no longer actively heavy. Priya had texted 3 times. Nathaniel had sent a brief message about a call on Monday regarding the Berlin second phase funding. Dio had forwarded 3 documents that needed her review before Wednesday. She was flying back to London in the morning. She had a building to finish. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Dio. Brief, precise, telling him which of the 3 documents needed her attention first and why. And then she set the phone on the nightstand and closed her eyes. Outside, Manhattan continued in its permanent, magnificent, exhausting motion. The bridges lit the water. The traffic moved. Somewhere uptown, in an apartment on the Upper East Side, a man was sitting at a desk beginning to write something that might, in time, become a reason rather than a record. Somewhere in a federal archive in 3 countries, the documented remains of a network that had been built to destroy something were being processed by people whose job was to ensure that destruction became consequence. And in a hotel room on the west side of Manhattan, Amara Coleman lay on top of the covers in her work clothes with the city lights crossing the ceiling above her and her hands open at her sides. And she was not thinking about what she had lost, or what had been done to her, or the long geography of the last 3 years. She was thinking about the cantilever in Berlin, about the load distribution, about the specific architectural problem of building something that extends beyond its own foundation and must therefore be anchored with extraordinary care, with attention to every force that will be brought against it. Wind, weight, time, the slow, patient pressure of the world trying to return everything to ground level. It was a solvable problem. She had already solved it. She had showed Brandt the math, and he had gone quiet in the way of someone who has been shown they were wrong, and the model was running, and the numbers were correct, and the building would stand. She had built something extraordinary. She would build something more extraordinary still. That was the whole of it. Not triumph, not arrival, not the clean resolution that stories perform for the comfort of their audiences. Just the ongoing, demanding, deeply human work of a person who has learned, at considerable cost in the hardest possible classroom, what she is made of. The city moved around her. She breathed. She slept.